Top of the morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the listeners out there. A hearty and healthy Irish hello. We are allowed to drink tea on this show, Deanna.
Wonderful.
Did I tell you to bring tea?
You did. I have my water with me.
All right, wonderful. Listening to the Celtic Coach radio show where science, spirituality, and self-discovery meet. Think about it, if Wayne Dyer, Marianne Williamson, and Robin Williams had a baby, hopefully it would turn out to be something like this show. If you're listening on the radio, you'll pick us up at KOWS.FM, F for Frank and M for Matilda. We are coming to you at Cows Community Radio outside of Sonoma County, the best darn radio station on the planet. If you're picking us up in your car, or maybe you're flying around the universe in your UFO, you can pick us up at 92.FM on the dial. All right, our next guest. Now, I've been doing this show for 10 years, and I've had the honor of inviting people on, guests onto the show that have really made a huge impact in my life personally. And today's guest is no different. I was introduced to this lady's work probably about a little over a year ago. And boy, has it made the difference. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the show. So our next guest today is a lady that hails from Winnipeg, Canada, Deanna Hanson. She's a certified athletic therapist and founder of Fluid Isometrics and Block Therapy. This is a bodywork practice that is a therapy exercise and then a meditation all in one. Deanna began her practice as an athletic, I'm really having a problem with the A's today, therapist in 1995, focusing on deep tissue work. Deanna's work benefits people of all ages, which we're going to talk about today, as well as any condition. Focusing on the fascia system, her work teaches people to melt through adhesions and scar tissue, ultimately awaking cells previously blocked from blood and oxygen. For those listening today with any debilitating issues, to the elite athletes, this work can be modified to address any and all situations. Deanna has developed an online teacher training program, Block Therapy University, so that people around the world can teach in their communities and empower others to become their own health advocates, which is one of the reasons I wanted Deanna to come on, because I have found that to be absolutely true. I have become my own health advocate through this work. In other words, I'm starting to realize there's a lot more that I can do to really heal my own body outside of conventional medicine and other modalities out there. There are currently 160 people globally, either certified or going through the process. I can tell you our next guest is someone that I have a lot of admiration and appreciation for her work. I had a lot of physical problems that the mainstream doctors could not fix. And it was, I want to say it was out of a desire, but I think it was more out of desperation that I found this lady's work. So without all of that, please put your virtual hands together for our guest today, Deanna Hanson.
Thank you so much. I am so honored and excited to be here sharing with your community. And I'm just looking forward to having a discussion with you.
Yes, I've been looking forward to it for quite a while myself, Deanna, too. When I say that your work has really been impactful for me, it's not an over exaggeration. I suffered for years with chronic constipation and tried diets and gave up smoking and drinking and coffee and sugar and asparagus, which I was fine to give up the asparagus. I don't particularly like it anyway. And a lot of chronic neck injury pain that I've had and has significantly reduced. It hasn't grown back my hair yet, but I am optimistic. Deanna, would you mind just sharing a little bit, just so that people can get, kind of get to know you a little bit better? Could you share a little bit of how you came to this this work called block therapy. First shows the block, because people are like, block therapy. So this is what it looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
two sizes here. We have the block buddy the block buddy and the little guy, the block baby. They're both made from bamboo.
Yeah. Now, when I was sharing with my clients, because I do a lot of coaching for small businesses and corporations and companies, and I share with them, block therapies. I tell them about block therapy, and I show them my block, and they go, "How in the hell, Dermot, is sitting on a piece of wood going to solve my chronic pain?" Now, before we get into that, though, will you tell us how you got, because this is so unique. I've never heard of such a thing. I've heard of, using the block in yoga and stuff, but this is a completely different thing. Would you share a little bit of your story, Deanna, of how this all came into being?
Absolutely. So I'm 51 now, and this process began for me when I turned 30. So prior to that, I had gone through university to become an athletic therapist, and I had a very successful practice, primarily focusing on deep tissue work. As good as my practice was, my personal and physical health was not good. Even though I was applying what I learned in university, I was 50 pounds overweight, struggling with anxiety, depression, constipation. The harder I worked, the more my system became hard and dense, and the more everything just ramped up. And I had to make some big decisions in my 20s because I had made some very bad decisions in my 20s. So at the age of 30, I quit drinking. And that was a huge step in the right direction. But what resulted from that was severe anxiety attacks, because now I had to look at my life from a sober lens. And it was pretty painful. I had already left 2 marriages. I was in a business partnership with somebody that I didn't respect. And there was a lot of challenges with that. So now I was having these anxiety attacks because I was having to address my life from a completely different perspective without being able to hide. So this one anxiety attack in particular was the seed of everything to come. In the moment, I literally thought I was going to die because I was so wrapped up in my craziness that I couldn't catch my breath, which was somewhat terrifying. But for some reason, I intuitively dove my hand into my abdomen. And this was a really interesting moment for me because as much as I was a deep tissue worker, I didn't go into people's bellies, let alone my own, because this is where I carried my 50 extra pounds of weight, primarily centered in my core. So I really loathed that area of my body and I avoided it as much as I could. So now here I am diving into it. But the first thing that was really interesting was it took me right out of that anxiety attack and it brought me back to the ground. And I knew I was safe because I was able to find my breath. What was so powerful was the amount of pain that was in there. And I didn't realize it was in there because, I never penetrated that area with my hand. So I was really shocked at the amount of pain, but the pain was so grounding. But then as I was just intuitively exploring in the tissue, what was really interesting was it was marbled with what felt like scar tissue, even though I didn't have any injury or surgery in the area. And I used to come home from a 5-mile run, dripping wet with sweat, and my belly would feel cold. And suddenly I was having these aha moments. No wonder my body's not changing. Well, it was changing for the worse. No wonder it's not changing for the better because there was no blood flow getting to that area to metabolize it. So that first night, I just spent about 30 to 45 minutes intuitively exploring. And I felt really calm. I woke up the next day a little tender, but I felt calm through the whole day, which was not my norm. So I was really excited to get home that night after a day of patience and dive back in, and I did. And after I stood up that second day, something changed. I felt taller. And I went and I looked at myself in the mirror and I immediately began to cry because my belly was flatter than it had looked in years. And I worked hard. Like I was doing 400 sit-ups a day. I was doing pretty much every workout you could imagine, and the rules of weight loss weren't applying to me, but it wasn't just about that. It was about all the other things that came as a result of that. So every night I would come home excited to work on my own body. And after 2 weeks, my chronic low back pain was going away. This led me to flip my patients onto their backs so I could just intuitively work on them in the similar way that I was working on myself. And I was having these incredible results. So it wasn't long before I started attracting therapists that wanted to learn the technique. So for the first 10 years of my career, I had clinics where I was teaching therapists the therapeutic practice, which I call fluid isometrics. Mm-hmm. But I always wanted to teach self-care. And I tried teaching people to use their hands on themselves, but at the time there were too many limiting factors. So it was purely an organic process where I was in a private yoga session. I was doing some restorative yoga, and my teacher had me lying over a bolster in a twist, and she cautioned me that this goes very deep. Now, I was already 10 years into diving my hands into my body and, having made all these deep changes already. And I thought, I'm not even going to feel that. So I had one of my old Iyengar rectangular wooden blocks nearby, and I said, I want to lie on that. And she's like, that's crazy. That's going to go way too deep. And I said, no, let me just lie on it. And as soon as I did, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't need to use my hands. I can just move my body into this block, but it was sharp. It had, sharp corners. Yeah. So, I could move in a little, but then it was like, okay, that's too deep. So one of my therapists who was a woodworker, we decided to play around and create the proper shape of the tool so that we could go deep, because the goal is to get to the bone. Fascia connects every cell from head to toe in the body. And we have proper foundations in the body to support cellular alignment. But if we don't strengthen and support those foundations, the body starts to fall and migrate down toward the earth under the influence of gravity and unconscious posture and breathing. So we basically spiral down. We get shorter and wider as we age. And those adhesions are the problem, holding the body from tipping over. And they will actually grip right onto bone with up to a 2,000 pound per square inch force. So that's an incredible force. It's a magnetic force. So if we want to unlock what's going on in the body, we have to be able to get to the root of the problem. And this is why in the beginning we were using cedar, and you have our cedar tool. Mm-hmm. We've recently shifted to bamboo. Both cedar and bamboo are similar in density to bone. That's why we use this medium, because in order to be able to drive through those layers of adhesions in the fascia to get to the root, we need something similar in density to do that. Anything made of plastic, it's going to stay more on the surface. All of the fascia rollers, they'll improve blood flow surface wise, but they're not going to drive through those layers to really get to the issues at hand. And it's those roots that block blood and oxygen flow to cells, which cause pain, aging, disease, and ultimately death. So we want to keep our cells properly aligned and properly fed and clean lifelong so that they can do their job for us, which is to help us thrive. And most people are only in survival mode right now, because what has happened from compression over time is, one of the things anyways, is the rib cage literally collapses into the core of the body, which is why we find it's harder to, lose weight as we get older. But it's not fat, it's displaced fascia from falling in and ballooning outward, and the resultant toxicity from a lack of flow. So what we want to do again is melt through those adhesions, connect to the proper diaphragmatic breath. And when we do, we feed the body up to 6 times the oxygen. Like 6 times more oxygen is 600% more oxygen.
Oh yeah.
That's a ton.
It's amazing. It's because I was laughing the other day. There's times where I get off the block, after lying on my belly or on my chest or doing, your classes are wonderful online, and we'll share all that information at the end. I have so much energy. And usually I do yoga, block, and then meditation. And some days I got so much energy going that I cannot sit to meditate, depending on the class that I did. I find this fascinating, Deanna. I consider myself, well educated. And I've done a lot of different modalities and therapies and yogas and a lot. I lived in LA for 10 years, so I got to try everything. It was really wonderful. LA is like just a smorgasbord of, whatever you could think of, it's there in LA. But I never heard of anyone, even the doctors and the people that I went to about my chronic pain, my constipation, body workers, chiropractors, health healers. I've gone to all of them, and none of them ever talked to me about the fascia. I never heard about the fascia until I got introduced to your work. Can you give us a snapshot? Really, you have this lovely metaphor that it's like a wetsuit in the body. Can you talk about what the fascia really is and why is it so important to health and healing?
So the way I see it, and I went to the world's first fascia conference in 2007 that was held at Harvard in Boston. And I mean, it's interesting because Ida Rolf, developed Rolfing. I think it was back in the 70s. It might have been earlier than that. John Barnes developed myofascial release earlier than 2007. So, I mean, there's fascia applications already in the holistic world. But I went to the world's first fascia conference in 2007, and I was really excited to go because when they talked about it, they shared that we really only understand about 4% of this system. And, you know, surgeons will go in and cut it away and throw it out. And so it was a coming together of the medical community, of the yogis and the body workers, all who work in the system to try to chart a course for the future. And I was really excited because I knew I had a lot of insight and a lot to share. And it was an interesting moment for me because we spent a lot of time looking at fascia from cadavers, which my analogy would be you've taken a leaf damaged in a tornado, and now you're dissecting the leaf to try to understand what happened. It's too late.
Right.
So, you know, I think at the end of the day, one of the things that has not brought people to this understanding is pain, because we have been taught to move away from pain, to drug it, to avoid it in whatever way we have. And the whole thing about what we teach is to teach people to become pain seekers. And for me specifically, I think the reason that I was able to embrace it so strongly was because my anxiety was through the roof. So the amount of pain that I could inflict on my body was never worse than the discomfort I felt from my anxiety at the time. And so pain, I mean, I understand why people do things like cut. So, I mean, in a sense, I was doing that same thing. I was trying to feel, but instead of doing something that was a blow or an insult to the fascia, I simply moved in and I applied the pressure. And what that did is it forced the breath. And at the same time, I had also been doing the practice of Iyengar yoga. So I had learned right away that nobody's breathing, because every 30 seconds, our amazing teacher would be reminding us to breathe. And I would recognize that I'm not breathing. So I tied it all together in the beginning, that pain and the breath. And then as soon as I was able to stay with that pain, with the breath, the pain changed. And as an athletic therapist, we learn about pressure overriding pain. The pressure fibers are larger in the body than the pain fibers. So that's the basis of a TENS machine. You know, when you put those electrodes around a pain site and you stimulate it, you're getting those pressure fibers to override the pain. Same as if you hit something and you rub it, that's essentially what we're intuitively doing. So through the process of blocking it, it is about becoming a pain seeker, but moving through the layers consciously with the breath. And that's a completely different ballgame, because what we're doing is melting adhesions. We're not breaking anything in the body. We're melting through the layers. So it's a process of time. We stay in each position a minimum of 3 minutes, because you can't rush melting. And I'll use the analogy, if you had a block of ice and you took your hands and you rubbed the block of ice to try to melt it, you'd probably just burn your hands. They would feel burning. If you just let your hands settle into that block of ice, eventually you're just going to pick up an intuitive flow as the ice starts to melt. And that's what we're really doing on the body, is we're diving into those deeper layers, melting through those adhesions so that we can connect to the cells that are deeper than what we're consciously aware of. And every single cell in the body is connected through the fascia system. I actually see the cell membranes of each cell as being an interconnected path to every other cell. So the fascia is kind of like a sponge, and we absorb. We're always absorbing, whether it's toxins or negative energy or sunlight or whatever it is. We're always absorbing. Through the process of proper breathing, we can take in what we choose and we can exhale what no longer serves us. But most people don't have that connection to the breath, because over time, as we collapse the rib cage into the core, those adhesions around the rib cage block the diaphragm's ability to work fully, which is why we always start our work in the rib cage and the core to access proper diaphragmatic breathing. And then once we do, we become a different healing machine inside of ourselves, because oxygen is the first and foremost nutrient that every cell needs to thrive, which is why you feel that amount of energy, because ATP uses oxygen to drive the fuel in the cell. So the more oxygen we can pump into the bloodstream, the more energy the cells will have. And you're also waking up more cells to be used in your body, because adhesions block them. So as we're melting, we're awakening these cells. So sometimes people get really hungry when they start, or really dehydrated, because now suddenly, like, we need to pump more water in. As we awaken more cells, the body has to produce more blood. So, you know, it's all a process of understanding what this body that we've been given is here to do and how to drive it. And we just haven't been given the right information.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I remember in a lot of your videos online, because you can go online, folks, and and we'll share that information later. And there's classes there that you can use the block. But I've heard you talk about the fascia in the body as like a wetsuit, like a mesh wetsuit, and the blood being a river. And if the blood is stagnant and not flowing, that mesh suit is going to get all icky and stucky and, crappy. But when the blood is flowing, that fascia is clean, and now you're oxygenating the whole body. I mean, am I even close on that?
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate. For the last 14 years, I've lived on the 13th floor of a high-rise right beside a river. And here in Winnipeg, we freeze in the winter and we get really, really hot in the summer. So I've been able to see the river freeze and thaw repeatedly. And it's quite fascinating, because ultimately our bodies have become like a frozen river. There's still flow, but not the flow to keep us thriving. There's enough flow to keep us surviving. The body's ingenious. So, if we don't have enough oxygen to feed every cell, it's going to forgo your baby toe to make sure that your heart is looked after, because that's what the body does. But at the end of the day, if we want to thrive and be the conscious humans that we were put here to be, every single cell is of equal importance, and every single cell has information to share with our brain so that we can navigate each moment as a unique moment. But when we have these blocks to blood flow, there's cells in the body that get shut down. So we end up relying on memory to make decisions in life, as opposed to looking at this current opportunity as something unique that we can choose in this very moment to act, as opposed to react.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things that I found was really powerful about this work, and again, I'm going to show people the block. If you're watching on the audio, then you're just going to have to go to the website later. But this is the block, and even when I'm sitting at home, I can. You said to put it on your leg, or there's certain positions you can use from it. I also want to share. For those listening, Deanna's new book, Unblock Your Body. I love that it's this thick. I love that the audiobook was, I don't know, we listened to it on the way to hiking. We listened to the whole thing a couple of times. I love that it's very simple, very clear information in terms of what the fascia is. You say here, how decompressing your fascia is the missing link in healing. Unblock Your Body is your new book, and I really enjoyed reading that, because it gave me an insight, Deanna, into how important the fascia is and why it's so important to the body. One of the topics that I wanted to talk to you today about is constipation. Now, I'm giggling as I say the word, but there's a lot of people out there not giggling. For years, I suffered with chronic constipation, where, not to get into details, but I would have a bowel movement maybe once every 5 to 7 days. And I stopped, smoking. I was drinking and doing all sorts of crazy stuff back then. I was like you, 30, life came knocking and said, Dermot, you need to stop doing this, and this. But I had for years chronic neck pain, jaw pain, clenching of the jaw, messed up a lot of my teeth because of that, the alignment of my jaw, and constipation. And I tried all the diets, and I did, I started yoga because I started meditating. Because people say, it's just stress, just do some yoga. So I did yoga and meditation and all sorts of stuff. And nothing, it all helped a little bit, but it didn't take it away. And then I was introduced to one of your teachers, Chris Stoner. And we were at a particular conference together, and I got to meet her, and she started telling me about block therapy. And of course, my was like, piece of wood on my belly. I said, look, I've done some strange things in LA, but a piece of wood on my belly is that's kind of, don't have a scope for the imagination there with that one. But she said, let me come to your hotel room and you and your girlfriend can try it. And I said, all right, come bring your block. And she came to the hotel room and she said, you know, what are you suffering with? I said, constipation, number one, constipation. And she showed me how to lie on the block. Just lie on the block on my belly. So I put it, you know, I lay on the ground, I put the block, you know, right in the middle, belly button on the block. And I lay there. And it was like an enlightenment experience. Not saying everyone's going to have that, but my belly was like rock solid. And I said, oh, I didn't realize my belly was so hard. And I just lay on there for 5 minutes. And as I was laying on there, I could feel my belly getting softer. And I had quite a cathartic experience, you know, where she was there, but I wanted to bawl. I really felt, oh my God, I'm feeling quite emotional right now. 33% of people over 60 suffer from constipation. 2 to 3 million laxatives per year. 4 million people in America today suffer from constipation and chronic constipation. So it's no laughing matter. What's your idea? Because you talk about that in the book. What's your idea on constipation, and how does the block help constipation, Deanna? And why are we so stuffed up?
Yeah, and I mean, I used to struggle with it as well, and it is no laughing matter. I mean, in the morning, if you don't have a good bowel movement, your day is trapped in yesterday, and to me, that's how it is. I can't get past the yesterday and be present in today, because yesterday is still inside me, and maybe last week, or who knows how long, right? So adhesions are kind of like closed doors, and adhesions, the more adhesions develop, the more gravity manipulates, and it becomes like a black hole. You keep getting more and more and more. So I call them, eventually we end up with these false walls or false floors. So it's literally like we have the door closed inside the body, and it comes from two directions. So we already talked about how the rib cage over time literally collapses into the core of the body. That displaces organs. It stops our ability, from breathing, which creates heat and movement. For there to be movement, just like being on top of this river here, there's a flow when it's warm. When it's frozen, there's little to no flow. So we want everything in the body to flow. We pull it in and then we want it to flow out. But if we have all these adhesions or walls or floors in the way, scar tissue, it's blocking flow. So we don't absorb nutrients, we don't eliminate properly, and then we end up getting inflamed because the system is getting overtaxed, overloaded. Inflammation creates more. Then we attract more parasites, more bacteria, they create waste. So then the belly just gets flogged with so much pressure and congestion. And over time, these fluids, they get stickier because, everything is sitting just kind of like in a bog, like it's not a good thing. And I mean, like, you can drive past a bog and you can even see how it smells. It's not a good thing either. Now, so it comes partly from the top of the body, but also what's fascinating is understanding how the calves and the feet are so impactful in our alignment in general. I work a ton with scoliosis patients, and it's the spine that is the focus of scoliosis, but it's not the cause. What's happening is the legs, they end up twisting in two different directions because we're dominant on one side. So if we don't adhere to proper foundations, we start tipping off balance, and the pelvis starts to swivel. And as it starts to swivel in relation to what the legs are doing, it starts to basically act like a vice to what's going on inside. So now you've got doors closing from the base as well as from the top. And then we end up with this area in the core that is just under so much pressure, and everything gets stagnant and there's no movement. So as we start blocking and melting these adhesions and working the breath and heating the system, we start to undo those adhesions, open those doors for flow, and then eventually the body kicks in. And for some people, it's immediate. For some people, it takes longer. But either way, it is all about improving flow, including the flow of the bowel movement out of the body.
Yeah, that was so staggering to me that because Chris, all she did was show me how to lie on the block, and we had the block for about another 2 months at the house before I even looked at it again. And then one night I was like, my belly was not well. I said, okay, let me try the block thing again. And after that, my health started getting better. Like I started having, In fact, this is way too much information, but I started tracking my bowel movements on my calendar. And so I have my bowel movements on my calendar, because it used to be something like 10 to 12, on a good month, 15 bowel movements, which is not that many.
No.
And I found that after doing about 2 weeks of the block, I started going to the bathroom more. And that really, I was like, wow, that really caught my attention to where, I do block morning and evening now. It's just amazing. It's amazing. So I suppose it sounds like a little bit like if you took a towel and a wet towel and you kind of did that, and then the blocking is kind of unraveling the towel. Would that be
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're ironing everything out. Every cell has a perfect alignment that it wants to be in. But what happens, I call it cell migration, is under the influence of gravity and unconscious living, we start to migrate away from proper alignment. So the further the cell is from its natural resting place, the less productive that cell is for you in your health. And I always like referring to a video called The Life of a Cell by David Belinsky. If you see what goes on in every single one of our trillions of cells, it brings tears to your eyes. It is absolutely stunning. This universe of activity and the synchronization of all these different parts as your cell is responding to its needs and the environment. And every cell is interconnected to every other cell. So if I were to take your arm and pull your arm and basically draw your shoulder forward and hold it for a month, you're going to have a fatigued shoulder. Right. If you go and you have the shoulder worked on, that's not going to take away the reason that it's tired. If I let your hand go, suddenly the shoulder can go back, and then there's no reason for the fatigue anymore. So the way that the fascia winds and pulls those cells away from home and then locks it is really the challenge here with the body. And to be able to unlock that and allow those cells to come back to their proper home, then they're happy. And then they don't need to give you pain signals, because pain is just the baby crying. It's just the cell saying like, hey, mom or dad, you're asking me to, run a marathon, and yet you're starving me. Like, what do you think I'm going to do? Right.
Wow. Yeah. I like that. So basically, because of, poor posture and everything else, we're starving the cells of oxygen. And so the block therapy is a way to just bring a lot more oxygen to the cells through the fascia, through that network of, wow.
And through the process of really focusing on that full exhalation. And in 2014, there was a study done in Australia that proved that 84%, this is a neat number, 84% of weight loss comes through proper exhalation. And I mean, it is, because I mean, for me, having been constipated, when you finally get that flow, you feel change physically in your belly, because you're actually moving this stuff out. But yes, you might have one a day. If you're lucky, you might have more than one a day. Some people don't have one a day. But every single breath, if we can focus on that full exhale, we're taking oxygen in, O2, we're breathing carbon dioxide, CO2 out. So we're taking that carbon out of the body, and every breath, there was a TED talk done on this. It's fascinating. But to understand that that's what's required for weight loss. And that made sense to me, because back in my 20s, when I was 50 pounds overweight, I was eating less than I was expending. I was working so hard and I was getting bigger. And I'm like, why are the rules of weight loss not applying to Deanna here? Because I'm in the gym like these other people and I'm doing the work, and yet I'm not getting the results. And then when I finally, brought it all together, it made total sense. I wasn't breathing at all.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating, because if you look at a baby breed, they breed from their belly. And we, as we grow older, we don't have time to even breathe. We just breathe from our chest, and so we're not fanning the fire in the belly. Because I love that all blocking starts in the belly to get the belly warmed up and get the fire going, and then from that center place, it's kind of like when they back in the 1800s, when they really knew how to build houses that lasted for years and years, they would have the heart, HEARTH. The heart, the fire, they would have that always in the center of the house, so that it heated the house. Now we kind of have the fire wherever, but that says to me, the same as block therapy, that we start in the center, and then we we work out from there.
And I use the analogy that the diaphragmatic breathing is like turning on the body's furnace, or like the inboard motor of a boat. Breathing through the muscles of the upper chest is like a space heater. It will heat one room. I live in a 30-story building, and a space heater might heat my bedroom. If we want to heat this entire building, we need to turn on the furnace. I also use the analogy that the upper chest breathing is like a trolling motor. It still drives, but it doesn't have the power or the endurance as the inboard motor of your house does. If you want to go fishing, it's great to troll. But I mean, if we want to live and we want to do all the things that we're meant to do here in this life, we need a powerful motor. And the reason that we lose the breath is because pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath. In a perfect world, this would, shift the chemical response in the body. It would have your adrenal glands shooting out hormones for that fight or flight. But we've ultimately made this our habit all the time. So now we're in a freeze state. There's fight, flight, and freeze. And we are not breathing properly because stress is chronic. I mean, look what we're living in today. It's everywhere. So we've habitually lost the breath. And what's even more something to note is that the younger generation are growing up in a different way. And I'm working with babies who are not breathing from their belly. So we actually have videos to teach parents to get their babies to breathe from their belly, which will help them sleep and digest, and it will make a world of difference.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment, because it's not just, the teenagers with, I don't have my phone, it's somewhere, this head forward, shoulders in, down, and God bless us all, but I think we are in trouble, because I go out and that's all I see with these kids. And one of the things that I've learned from your work is when I'm at the computer, I used to be like this over the computer when I'm writing, or and now I've really made the effort to sit straight. I mean, the kind of, you read it in those health books, sit with your back straight. It's like, yeah, well, that's a great idea. But you take it to a whole new level where you talk about the posture is so important. And we have kids today that are just, their posture is horrendous. Now, you work with kids. Do you have a story or something you could share with somebody that you've been working with, Deanna, that you've helped, that we could kind of connect to?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one young boy, Zen, and he's 6 years old. And I initially met with he and his parents because he had such severe scoliosis. And at the age of 6, they wanted him in a brace for 18 hours a day until he was fully grown, at which time they wanted to fuse his spine.
Oh my God.
And these people live in Ontario, kind of like in the bush. So, I mean, this isn't a kid that's sitting in front of his computer all day or using his phone all day. Like, he's outside. And what had happened was about 6 months before this call, he had picked up the bow, and he just became, like, they said, like hours a day, he was practicing bow and arrow, and he literally twisted himself into this alignment. Mm-hmm. So very quickly, he adopted doing the block, which is amazing, because some kids won't, right? Like, it's a bit of a discipline, but he just
it is. Yeah.
And I said to them, like, let's train the opposite arm, because we have to bring the body back into balance, because ultimately through this action, he's pulled himself into this state. And that's the thing about the fascia. What we do all the time matters. I mean, I remember, like, as you're a kid, like, don't make that face, it's going to freeze that way. There's a little bit of truth to that. If we're always sitting forward, then the fascia magnetically will seal us in that alignment. So I work on a lovely 17-year-old girl, a concert violinist. She's actually going to be one of the leads for our Block Therapy Academy for kids. I've worked with her for 2 years. So, spent her whole life like this. Right. So that alignment, but it comes down to how the limbs are and how they turn, because the further we are from the engine, the more frozen the fascia. So the forearms and the hands and the calves and the feet, to me, are always the things that I look at first when assessing a body, no matter what the issues are, because that is going to be the holding pattern. These are like tent poles. We want them holding that tent up so that everything is ironed out, as opposed to you let those tent poles go, the tent starts to crumple and wrinkle, and then you get leaves caught in it. And I mean, that's ultimately what's happened to us. We've become these deflated, dirty cells that don't have that ability to be buoyant and light. So we become these heavy bodies, and we want to bring lightness back into the body, so movement becomes a joy as opposed to a burden.
Yeah. Now we're talking about kids, but you know, as I'm talking here, you know, I know, like I remember my mom, very, very not tall lady, but always quite erect, quite straight, you know. And I remember in her later years, she probably she like, it seemed to me like she had shrunk about, you know, 6 to 12 inches. Is that part of the fascia where you see old people? No, I don't mean old, but senior people. I don't know what politically correct it is, but senior people, they seem to get shorter as they age. Does that have to do with anything with the fascia?
Absolutely. There's 3 pillars to block therapy. The first is creating space. So there's a time-space continuum. As we go through time or get older, we decrease in our internal space because of gravity. We get shorter and wider as we age. With block therapy, we put the space back into the tissue by melting through those adhesions, by connecting to that proper diaphragmatic breath. So again, 6 times the oxygen. Now we have all of this oxygen for those cells to pull in. Think of blowing up a balloon. We want that balloon to be fully blown up, so it's not wrinkled, it's glowing, it's defying gravity. We want all of our cells to be that way. And if so, then we stay magnetized in this crystalline structure matrix of the fascia. And in yoga, they refer to it as effortless effort. We want to bring effortless effort into the body, but when we don't breathe properly, we deflate, because just think of taking that air out of the balloon, it becomes heavier, it becomes wrinkled. You can't see the glow anymore, so that light that we have isn't shining outward as it can. And we become, again, these heavy burdens, and we start twisting down. So we want to bring everything back into alignment. And then the third part of block therapy is maintaining the space. So we have these foundations in the body, but we haven't really used them. So for example, the tongue muscle. The tongue muscle is here for us to talk, to chew. It's also here, though, to support the weight of the head. But if we don't use it for that purpose, and we don't, most of us, it actually becomes a burden. And people that have what they think is a double chin, it's actually a displaced tongue. So that comes partly, like as you were talking about your neck pain, when that rib cage falls in, it pulls things forward. And I remember years ago, I was watching a Dr. Oz show, and he was saying when your head is perfectly aligned, it weighs 8 to 10 pounds. When it falls out of alignment, it can be up to 100-pound force on the muscles of the upper back and neck. So as soon as you pull in here, the head starts pulling forward. Now the jaw starts pulling forward. So we clench. The muscles are fighting this forward pull, this 2,000 pound per square inch pull. No wonder they're exhausted and sore in the back. So again, you go for a treatment on your back and it might feel good for a moment, but without releasing those adhesions in the front, we're just caught in a loop. Yeah. So we want to get to the root of the issue, which again is at the bone, which is why it's so important that the tool is the medium that it's made of.
Yeah, you share in your book, Unblock Your Body, you talk about a lady, 87 years of age you worked with. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, she was 86, I think. So she came with her daughter, Quinn and I at the time. Quinn is my nephew and my partner in crime in this. We were doing live classes. I live in this building, and Quinn lives upstairs in the penthouse where we do all of our videos and where we were teaching classes before COVID. So there'd be 4 people, and we would combine handwork and block work, and it was like a 1.5 or 2 hour session. So she and her mother would come once a month, and she was 86 when she began. And then at home, they would be blocking together. And one of the things that she noticed was after she had gone to her eye doctor, the pressure in her eyes had gone down from 15 and 16 to 9 and 10. And the doctor was shocked because he's like, I don't know what you're doing, but I mean, we've never seen this before, but keep doing it. And she also was sharing like her bloated belly, which she'd had since she was young, like a child. And suddenly she was like, you know, clothes were fitting better and she was starting to have more energy. So it's lovely because it doesn't matter your age, what condition you're starting with. You can do the work in bed. We've got chair classes for people that can't get onto the floor. And you can also ramp it up to a very different level and turn it into quite an exercise. So it really is applicable for anybody and everyone. And improving blood and oxygen flow, no matter your situation, is only going to benefit.
Yeah. And that's amazing, because I mean, you see older people, and again, the stats with constipation: 33% of people over 60 are having chronic constipation. That's, I can't even think about how that is for people. Have you had any cases of people with cancer? Because to me, and I don't know, I'm not a doctor or anything. I'm just an Irishman pretending to know what he's doing. Part of that is blood flow, right, for cancer. What's your take on cancer, Deanna? And have you had any people work on cancer with the block?
We have. And in fact, in our Facebook community, there's a gentleman named Mike Palzik in the community who shares openly about his experience with liver cancer and how the Rick Simpson oil and block therapy were the two things, as well as clean eating, that he used, and he is now cancer-free. So he's a huge proponent for that. From my perspective, it really comes down to how dirty or clean our environment is. It's all about the environment. So again, if you look at a flowing body of water, if it's flowing, it's clean. If it's stagnant, things grow. And if cancer is growing, you have an environment that's stagnant and acidic. So by improving flow, by oxygenating the environment, you change the environment to allow things to not grow that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I remember a long time, I don't know, 20 years ago, remember hearing Tony Robbins talk about, they did this test where they took these cells and they put them in a little tube or something, and they gave them exactly what the cell needed every day. And the cells lasted pretty much for years and years and years and years. And they said, like, the cell should never die if it's getting specifically what it needs.
Well, and I totally agree. And I mean, from the whole perspective of aging, I don't agree with the idea that, 80 to 100 is kind of the best that we get from a longevity perspective. Yeah. I mean, if, like, to me, pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath, and that causes us to get pulled down, which essentially is going to cause our demise. If we don't allow that to happen, because we maintain proper cellular alignment and strong conscious diaphragmatic breathing, then the cells are properly fed and clean lifelong. So how long will we live? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think Greg Braden would be with you on that. He maintains he's looking at, I think, 150 to 200. That's his age.
I saw him speak. I actually flew to one of his seminars. He was instrumental when I was at the beginning of this. I read all of his books, and I just absolutely love his work.
That guy. Yeah. I've been following him for, I think, ever since life came knocking, probably at 30. I started following Greg Braden. I love that guy.
In Victoria back in 2000, I went to the Prophets Conference, which is when he was one of the speakers on the stage, and from that moment onward, I've been a massive fan of his.
He's totally amazing, that guy. Who else do you consider on the cutting edge of health and healing out there?
It's funny, I'm not. I mean, Joe Dispenza. He's absolutely amazing. I recently read his book, Evolve Your Brain, and the detail he goes into is fantastic. And one of the things I really loved about what he shared, which helped me recognize my own behaviors and habits, was how it's the blood chemistry that is the addicting component. So no matter what it is, if it's another individual in your life or a habit or a food, say sugar or alcohol, or like whatever it is, if you do it all the time, your blood chemistry changes to adapt to that. And then suddenly, if you try taking it away, your blood, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for you, it's going to revolt. It's going to say, like, your body's going to be like, hey, like, my blood chemistry isn't being kept up to date now. And so I'm going to make you feel crazy. And you're going to want to get that back in your life. And then we go through that process of withdrawal. But that made so much sense to me, because it is that. And that's why it takes a while to retrain bad habits. But if you give yourself the time, then the blood chemistry starts to change. And from the perspective of blood, when we oxygenate the blood, that's what's going to change the blood chemistry, because we've got these hemoglobin molecules and these 4 oxygen sites, kind of like tires of a car. If we don't have enough oxygen in the car, now we have all this iron in the blood that doesn't have the mobility to travel properly to the cells and then to pick up the waste so that it can leave in the body. And we end up with this toxic blood. And that's actually this is my perspective, nothing proven, but that's why I believe people have rheumatoid arthritis, is because they're simply, or any blood disease, there's not enough oxygen in their blood. So the metals in the blood, I mean, if you think of what a junkyard looks like, it's not a healthy place. And if there's a whole bunch of metal in the blood that can't be mobile, and metal is heavy, it sinks, then we have all this stagnancy, and that's going to cause toxins to be released into the bloodstream, and then the body's going to do with it what it is, but it's not going to be a positive thing.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's just as simple as changing the oil in the car.
Yeah.
Like we all do that, but how much attention are we giving our bodies?
Well, and that's just it. It really is simple. I mean, the body has become so complicated because partly like it's like legal language, like the medical language, it's hard to understand. If we can just really simplify everything and see it from the perspective that it all comes down to flow. If there's blocks to flow, there's going to be challenges, and we need to open the flow gates so that we can get what those cells need, and we can take away the byproducts of functioning, like the exhaust from a car. We need to pull it away from the area. We need to pull the toxins and everything out of the area so we can keep that flow clean, and then we're healthy.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm kind of thinking like the exhaust in the car that gets rid of everything from the engine. You know, our breath is the exhaust. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
And you really focus on the breath, Deanna, which I love, because I never thought about my breathing or how I breathe, or, you know, what kind of breathing, or even my posture. Like, you know, again, I've had to, even my tongue alignment. I mean, who the hell talks about tongue alignment? I've never heard of talk, you know, you're the first person. One of the other things I love with the block therapy is we use it on, like, you know, I did a few classes where I put it on my ear, on my jaw, which, by the way, holy guacamole. Yeah, I had so much pain on my eyebrows.
Oh, it's one of the worst.
I was seeing stars with putting it on my eyebrows. I actually couldn't, you know, I part of this is helping me with the vertigo that I've had for about 4 years. And it's really been helping me. And what I've learned is what you cause sites, you know, my eyebrows, because I had an episode of the vertigo when I put this on my eyebrow. Why is the face so tender and full of pain?
So everything is connected. And as we start getting pulled out of alignment from the foundation, the fascia on the head starts to grip and adhere, because ultimately the fascia is here to protect us. It's here to support our proper alignment. The body knows what it needs to be healthy, but if we don't give the body what it needs to be healthy, the fascia is going to respond to that. So if I'm always sitting like this, gravity is going to start pulling everything down year after year. And then these grips start to adhere onto the scalp, the skull. I mean, if you look at people when they're, say, in their 20s compared to when they're in their 50s or 60s, their entire shape of their head will change. Basically, it's like a vice grip. Now think of the brain inside the head. What's happening there? So when we release these adhesions and then we bring that alignment back, we can position everything, including the skull, including the brain, back so that proper flow is being received. And there's a book I read recently called Successful Aging, which I mentioned in my Unblock Your Body book, Daniel Levitin. And he was saying that the frontal cortex, or the frontal lobe of the brain, over time, basically it shrinks. Now, this part of the brain is problem solving, speech, reasoning, major things going on here, right? So if that part of the brain isn't working, suddenly he was basically saying that evolutionarily speaking, there's no need for the aging person to have this part of the brain working. So like it shrinks and ultimately we age. And I'm like, well, it does that though, because we're getting pulled forward and gravity is going to push it against the frontal bone. And then that pressure is going to stop blood and oxygen flow there. So we don't have to accept that. We can say, I'm going to be 110 years old and I'm going to be the wise woman that has a sharp brain because I keep it supported with proper alignment. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the way that we age today is based because we don't understand how to support and drive our bodies properly. If we do and we make that change, I don't see there being a need for us to go through a slow degenerative process before we die. I see that we can live until we die.
Yeah.
whatever that is.
I'm with you on that one, Deanna. I think Alzheimer's too, because that makes sense that if that's getting pulled forward, you're going to start forgetting stuff, because the brain's not getting oxygen, it's not getting blood flow. So that makes total sense to me, what you're saying. Just as we start to wind down a little bit, Deanna, take everything that we talked about today. No pressure. And what do you want people to hear from this conversation today? What's the most important thing you'd like them to walk away with from our conversation?
Actually, two things. Most importantly, and this is something I share all the time, is your breath is your guide. And we use that as to ensure safety in the tool. If something hurts so much it takes your relaxed breath away, then you're not serving your body, because now we're bringing force, and force is not good for the body. We want to persuade. So not only on the block, but your breath is also your guide in life. If you're lifting something and it's too heavy, and then you want to try to hold your breath and lift it, you're an injury waiting to happen. If you can breathe with movement, then you're keeping your body safe. So connecting to the breath is key. But also, and this comes down to the Greg Braden talk, in his book, The Science of Compassion, where I learned about the frequency of love is this, and the frequency of fear is this. The frequency of love equals the frequency of our DNA. So when we pass kind, loving thoughts, whether about ourselves or anything else in the world, through our body, we're tapping onto those codons in the DNA, and we're increasing vibration. When we pass fear or negativity through us, those codons start shutting down. And the shutting down, to me, is part of the reason why we literally start collapsing in our body. So the collapse can be physical, it can be mental, emotional, spiritual. It's all connected. But being kind to yourself and connecting to your breath are the two most important things that I see that this world really needs us to embrace to be the best humans we can.
Be kind to yourself, connect with your breath. I like that. I found, by doing block work, that I have started to become even kinder to myself. It's very interesting, kinder to the body, because the block is, as you say in the book, is a meditation, which is beautiful. Deanna, if people want to connect with you or find out more about block therapy, what are some websites, addresses that you could share, some resources?
Blocktherapy.com is our website, and there's lots of information on that website. And my book, Unblock Your Body, is on Amazon. I've got also an audiobook. I actually did the audio recording, so that was a lot of fun. That was the first time I've done that.
Yeah, it was nice to hear your voice in that. I like when the authors do it. It's a nice connection.
Yeah.
Well done on that, by the way.
Thank you. It's a nice storytelling too. So you get the input from the author as to the stories that are being shared. So those are the two places you can find us.
Cool. Well, I love your enthusiasm. I love your energy. I love that you're a walking, talking example of what you're teaching and sharing with the world. And that's really nice. That's very validating to see. So I really like that. Also, just on a personal note, thank you so much for creating block therapy. I can't, I wish I could have more time to tell you all the things that it's helped, but go on blocktherapy.com and check it out for yourself, because we can spout here all day long about health benefits of block therapy. And proof is in the pudding. So get your arse on the block and see if it helps you. All right, you've been listening to the Celtic Coach radio show, where science, spirituality, and self-discovery meet. We're here every Friday from 1 to 2 on cows.fm. If you're listening on the radio, you can pick us up at 92.5 FM. You can go to thecelticcoach.com for more episodes of the show. And if you want to connect with Deanna, you can go to blocktherapy.com. Until the next time, think big, have fun, and stay curious. Cheers, everyone.